Hello everyone, thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today I will be speaking about Esther de Reed, an Englishwoman in the American Revolution. Now I began this project by wanting to focus on women who lived during the American Revolution because I had learned so much about the male leaders of this movement, including the Founding Fathers, and I really wanted to dig into what it was like for women to live through this time, how they experienced it, what they contributed as well. And this led me to Esther. Now, I had not heard about her before this project. I'm interested in if anybody else has. Please let me know in the comments. But I really found her story very intriguing. Her story raises a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to explore those with you today, as well as in my paper, to see what we can learn from her life and from her stance on what it meant to be a woman in the American Revolution. But first, let's get some basic information. So Esther was born as Esther de Bert in London in 1746, and she died as an American patriot in 1780. This is my main question, is how did that transition happen? How did she change from a loyal Englishwoman to an American patriot, and a prominent one at that? So that's a question we're going to return to. Another thing I wanted to note right off the bat was that she did come from a place of socioeconomic privilege in a way. Her life is definitely shaped by economic forces that's going to impact a lot of decisions that she is making. But she does come from a wealthy family, and she does have a very good education, so that does set her apart from other women. However, she does write this next work, Sentiments of an American Woman, that really shows how she's trying to appeal to a wide range of women living in America at the time, and trying to promote patriotism for all of them. And we're going to think a little bit more about that later, because it's a very particular form of patriotism for women. One historian almost described it as aggressive. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. First, let's get into a very important figure in her life, her husband, Joseph Reed. They were married in 1770 after a courtship where they exchanged many letters, and it is through these letters that we can get an idea of how close a relationship they did have. And it was a partnership. It was built on genuine, affectionate friendship. And this is really important because they stick together through a lot, and they're able to work together on a lot of things that we'll keep talking about in a little bit. However, at the beginning of their relationship, they did face the obstacle of Esther's father. Esther's father did not approve of the match, and it is actually only after he dies that they are able to get married. And unfortunately, they also are getting married at a time when the family is going through a lot of financial hardships. So they make the decision to leave the colonies and leave England and travel back to the colonies in order to make their fortune there before they will return to England to live with Esther's family at that point. Unfortunately, that does not happen, but it's good to know that that was their goal, right? So in the meantime, they are living in Trenton and then Philadelphia, and as Joseph is working as a lawyer, and Esther is serving as his secretary and caring for their 6 children. But they do shift their focus eventually to politics and the growing revolutionary cause. Joseph is going to serve in these different positions in the Continental Congress. He's going to sign the Articles of Confederation and even work as the president of Pennsylvania, what we would call the governor today, making Esther the first lady of Pennsylvania. However, with this shift in politics, into politics, comes this question of why? Why did they change their allegiances from England to America? For Esther, we can see this happen in her correspondence, especially to her brother who is still living in England. The shift is definitely gradual in how she's thinking about these two places and these two homes for her. So in the beginning, she is definitely very pro-England. She wants to return. She can make herself content, but she does want to return to her family in England. However, this changes. She eventually starts writing about how she doesn't really think she can return, or she doesn't want to. And she even writes to her brother that you must come to America. So there's definitely a change in how she's thinking, and eventually she will promote the revolutionary cause that is fighting, as she sees it, tyranny. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the things that she actually did based on her change in perspective. So let's talk about American Revolution women and Esther. Was she fighting? No, not necessarily, even though when you search for Esther DeBert Reed, you will get soldier as her designation, which is a funny little quirk in the system because she did not fight, but she was fighting on the home front. You could say she was involved in boycotts and raising funds and writing, and these are the things that we're going to talk about involving her and her contribution to the struggle. So, The Sentiments of an American Woman. We're back at this famous publication that she made with several other women in Philadelphia in 1780. This broadside was signed by an American woman, and I think that's one of the first significant things we can see in that, because it is attributed to Esther, who identifies herself as an American woman in this. That is definitely a change that we can see her putting to paper publicly, that she is an American woman. This is her guide to how and why women should contribute to the revolution. And she uses some very strong language to advocate for this, that we won't get into completely because we don't have enough time. But let's dig into some of the language here to see how she's making that argument for women in America. So, first of all, from this quote, we can see that she's emphasizing we. It's a collaborative effort, right? Our ambition is kindled by the same of those heroines. We should at least equal and sometimes surpass men in our love for the public good. That is also a key line. We want to surpass men in our love for the public good. Throughout this writing, she is calling on men, actually calling on women, to do better than men and to really demonstrate how much they can support this effort in fighting off tyranny. She calls on women throughout biblical history and also from European history, including Esther, including Joan of Arc, including other female monarchs, all who she sees as fighting this battle against tyranny, and she wants to inspire other women to take up the same position. Again, it is almost aggressive. It is not just women passively sitting by. It is calling them to arms in a way, at least financially speaking. Not exactly going out into the field, but still taking an active interest outside of the home in political matters. You could look at it that way. Now let's talk about her results, because she was very productive in this. We can see from this letter from George Washington to Esther in 1780. He is complimenting her on her efforts. She and the women of Philadelphia were able to raise over $300,000 for the soldiers of the Continental Army. However, there is some debate here in how they're going to use this money that I think is very interesting. George Washington would like the money sent to him directly and not given directly to the soldiers, as the women want to, because he thinks they will spend it on disruptive things like alcohol, for example. So they reach a compromise where the women of Philadelphia are going to help clothe the men. So they use the money to buy fabric, and they are going to sew that fabric into shirts. And they do. They create these shirts for the men, and they also embroider the names on the fabric so that the men will know that there are individual women out there supporting them. Unfortunately, Esther doesn't participate as much in this part of the effort because she passes away in 1780. So someone else takes her place, but we are still left to think about the response and impact that she made on the Revolutionary War. So we do have this quote here that shows how people were potentially not happy with what she was doing, although this is from a loyalist, so we can take this with a grain of salt. But Esther was still able to make an impact here. And even though she was pushing very hard, maybe too hard for some people, she was still able to reach her goal of providing for the troops, as well as engaging more women from her city and beyond in the drive to support the cause. even though she died young, she was still able to have an impact and is rightfully one of the mothers of the American Revolution, I would say.